Hey, good day. My name is Brian Huberty. I'm the Vice President for the Minnesota Forestry Association, and I was volunteered to give you this presentation on knowing more about your woodlands. And it's an evolution from what you've been reading in the newsletters here for the last year. And the latest one for the August-September issue highlights this suburban sugar bush. And in particular, we're going to be diving deep into this Minnesota Natural Resources Atlas that was developed out of the University of Minnesota Natural Resources Research Institute by Will Barch. Anyways, we'll get into that. And atlases are like anything, like this Atlas of Minnesota. There are layers of maps of different themes, and we'll see quite a bit here in a little bit. So with that, I'm going to share my presentation. And get this thing rolling here. And you see, excuse me, the introductory slide. I'll take a short break there. Anyways, let's know your land for management decisions. That's my contact information. And a little humor to start out. The reason you want to do this is you might have the woodland turn on you, and this is from Gary Larson. He's sort of a classic cartoonist. So for land management decisions, the best thing to do is think about the fundamental questions: who, what, where, when, and why, and as well as how much. And the way I approach it is subdividing the landscape, if you want to think of it that way, by thematic features like physical features, chemical features like water, biological features, trees, shrubs, critters, and so forth. But more importantly, through space and time. In other words, not just what's there today, but what's been there in the past, and also what might be there in the future. And let's just dive into why specifically is why we're doing this. Woodland stewardship plans, this is a very good reason to do this, is to lay out a plan for yourself about what's there and maybe what actions you're going to take. But more importantly, for future generations, not only your next generation, but maybe 2 or 3 generations from now, what's that landscape going to look like? And also another important thing to think about is fire. We're really in the state, we're really not thinking about fire logically, but we do go through droughts. I mean, the whole state has been burned at one time or another, going back 10,000 years. And it's something to, again, you may not think your forests are immune, but in reality, during a severe drought like the 1930s, things can happen. So again, keep that in the back of your mind, because this is one quick example out of Hubbard County near Long Lake of this homestead, which was saved by obviously the local fire department, or the DNR, where they sprayed down the trees around the perimeter and saved the property, but the fire went right around it. And that's the kind of thing you should really also think about of these changes. And ironically, I was just reading about the derecho that went through Iowa. That's another event that can occur, that did happen in the boundary waters. And that just wiped out the boundary waters, but in Iowa, it basically wiped out half the state's corn crop. So we're going to dive into this Minnesota Natural Resources Atlas, and the website is down here, mnatlas.org, where my pointer is. And if you Google like Minnesota Natural Resource Atlas, you'll get to it right away. That's another way to get to it. So with that, I'm going to switch gears here. And hang on one second. Why don't you go ahead and pause it? Okay, we're here at the website of the Minnesota Natural Resource Atlas. I'm going to be doing this live, so to speak. It's not a PowerPoint presentation. And I'll get started sort of so you can see where these tools are. And we're going to switch tabs here because I have preloaded a bunch of these layers. Otherwise, we'd be here all afternoon loading them up and explaining it. So this is the atlas, and it's at this website, mnatlas.org. And there's descriptions of how to use the atlas, as well as the catalog behind it and what it's about. But the mapping tool is what gets things rolling. And there'll be the usual disclaimer that'll pop up here, and you agree to the conditions. And so this atlas, it doesn't look like much, but it really has a lot behind it. And a key part in this is this options menu on the left side. So we're going to start with this middle tab of base map. And from that base map, you can pick the slate you're seeing now, or you can go to, for example, an aerial view of the whole state. There are also other tools, such as you can print this map out, you can do some analysis, you can find a specific location, like instead of zooming to it, you can just type it in and it'll get you there. And you can save the map settings for your backyard, for example. But where all the layers are is right here, and you hit this button, and right now the counties of Minnesota are showing up, but you hit add layers, and another box will pop up, and this is this laundry list of layers, and there's literally hundreds of layers here under different themes of biota, agriculture, environment, boundaries, climate, what else we got, geology, topology, and I have a list of like 40 layers we're going to sort of rip through in this presentation. Under the biology side of it, I'm just going to bring this up because I want to highlight, there it is, vegetation pre-settlement. And I'm going to get rid of that front end so you can see the state, and we can hit the legend on the upper right. And for each of these layers, as we bring them up, you will see this color scheme that ties into what you normally expect. So on the western part of Minnesota, the purple prairie systems, wet prairie systems, and the gold. The big woods in green here, going up through St. Cloud, and we're going to focus in on St. Cloud here in a second. The peat bogs up in northern Minnesota, the pines, the red pine, for example, these red belts, or orange belts, I'm sorry, were the original pine pre-settlement pines that were interpreted from the original land survey. And with that, we're going to zoom in. There's a zoom in tool on the left, but you can also just use, depending on computer, the mouse pad. You can also, another feature here is if you can adjust the opacity, so I can reduce this vegetation pre-settlement so it's slightly tinted, and we can go up here to St. Cloud, and past St. Cloud here we'll go to Collegeville, and we'll zoom into where St. John's University is, which isn't labeled exactly right. It's I think it's a Microsoft or an Esri problem here. John, your college has been renamed the College of St. Benedict, just FYI on this map. So that's for John Geisler, who's running this Zoom feature, this Zoom video recording. So anyways, if we can sort of intensify these colors, the dark green, it relates to the big woods, this green color up here, but also notice there are some other colors like this brush prairie through here. The dark purple, what was that again? I've got to put on my glasses. It's not open muskeg. The prairie, yeah, there it is. Prairies were scattered from the St. Cloud all the way up through Long Prairie, for example. And these were probably fire-dependent systems. So again, keep those ideas in mind as you're viewing this. And also, if I add in one more layer, which is down here to boundaries, parcels, where is public land saved, we'll just do sections. All these sections, 1 through 36, all these corners is what represents these polygons. Marshner was the name of the individual, the guy many, many years ago who looked at the original land survey notes where they put a point for a section corner. They also recorded the distance and bearing to trees around there. And from those section corners, and that's how they derived this map. So it's not exact, but it does give you an idea of what the landscape used to look like over 100 years ago, well, close to, we're approaching close to 200 years ago for Minnesota. So it's an interesting layer to look at, to think about what did your landscape look like, because it also may help dictate what you might be able to restore it to. So in this big woods area here, were there pines? Well, maybe after the glaciers receded and some remnants, but it became this sort of hardwood dominated forest. So with that, I'm going to switch tabs here. You'll see the same view again, but on the left, you'll see what's changed is I have a whole laundry list of layers we're going to go through. And we're going to zoom again into the St. John's University area. Right now, I only have the vegetation pre-settlement layer loaded in. And I will reduce the vegetation here so we can sort of see what's behind there. What do I have for my base map? We'll change that to, let's go with OpenStreetMap just so we can see where the roads are. There we go. I'm looking for Little Falls. I went a little bit further, too far north here. There's Little Falls. I suppose I can make life easier. There's a St. Cloud there on the right, and follow up I-94, and here's the St. John's. Oops, went a little too far. There's the St. John's campus area. So let's see here. At this scale, prairies to the west, obviously, as well as these scattered prairies following the corridor, the Highway 10 corridor, if you wish, and then these big woods pockets throughout here. If you click on the map, you will see for the particular layer vegetation settlement. I thought since it was active, it would have popped up a more referenced data set. I might have to pick on that. Show properties. Here you go. From all these different GIS layers, it'll pull out the area of these polygons, the perimeter, as well as where these data sets came from originally. Okay, so we'll zoom in just a little bit more. We'll go back to our map layers and we'll start whittling down through this laundry list of potential layers that might be of interest to you as you think about your landscape. So we've done pre-settlement vegetation, so let's look at native plant communities that might be mapped in your area. Now, if your land doesn't fall in these areas, you might be able to use this as a reference. So St. John's University, with their long history of forest management, has been contributing these data sources to the DNR. But as you can tell, it's not a complete data set. And again, since I have it highlighted, we can go to one of these polygons, it's one here by the interstate. It's requesting the information. What pops up? It's part of again the big woods, hardwoods, oak, maple, basswood, hickory stand, and the area for that particular polygon. So with that, I'm going to turn that back off. And I'm going to get rid of some of these as we go along. So that's our native plants. Probably, I think it's in the original biological survey that the DNR runs. There's a little bit more detail here and who observed it, when and where, and that kind of thing. All right. Another good one is invasive species. I'm going to turn that off, turn that on. And the way this layer works is actually it's sightings on the ground. So again, it's not comprehensive, but it may allow you to sort of help you identify invasive species that may be in your area or vicinity. So on the right side, you can see there is a whole, it's just a super long list of different colors. Another way to approach this is simply click on the dot. And as it digs into the database, it'll pull up, let's see, this particular one. Wait, I got to turn this, I got to get rid of this. Sorry, my bad. Let's go back to the invasive species, click on a dot here. Let's see if I get it to work this time. There you go. Common yarrow is what was found there. We can go up to this blue dot. Let's see what that picks, if that picks that up. Red clover, purple, what's the purple one? What else did they find? Hori alyssum. I think is that one particular plant. I actually don't know what that one is. So again, quite a scattering of invasive species that have been recorded by a specific location, not necessarily a polygon. Okay, continuing on. Let's get rid of that. I just threw in this one because it sort of looked interesting. Lakes of biological significance. The large lake south of the campus here was highlighted as outstanding for being diverse biologically, but the rest of the lakes there are probably moderate, given its color. It's sort of a light blue. That might be of interest. Land ownership type. That gets into public lands, Minnesota DOT lands. Obviously, there is an error here. There should be a red corridor going along I-94, as well as the bike trail, the former Great Northern Railway line here. I think it's the Lake Wobegon Trail. And I think this could be a state wildlife area that's sitting in the square area here. I wouldn't put too much, this lake is obviously valued. For some reason, it's pulled out in some database, but this might be of use to help you understand, well, are there some state or federal or private lands nearby that I might be interested in, or who my neighbors might be. Let's turn that one off. We did show you the public land survey system before, but I might as well pull this up again. It's just sections. And I do find this useful because when I ask people in the call before your cut program, well, where's your property at? And they'll give me an address for their home address, but they don't know what their parcel address might be. So again, you can click on any of these sections and it should pull out like this section north of the campus there. It's section 36 in township 125, range 30. Those are the key numbers here. And then this county number 73, each state, not only in Minnesota, but on the country, they all have their particular numbers, and that might be useful for you as well. Okay, so that's sort of interesting, but it is useful. Watersheds is another feature you might want to think about, is how does your landscape look and where does the water flow? And unfortunately, these watershed polygons do not have the flow lines associated with it. I think that's buried in another layer, which I didn't pull up. But these were derived, in this case, by both the USGS and the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources actually maintains these data sets. And there's a particular code. It's this HUC 12, this little 12-digit code tells you everything about this particular watershed, its size and what it's flowing into. So the way these watershed codes work is there's HUC 2, HUC 4, HUC 8, and you might hear about that. Well, HUC 2 is very broad scale. That's like the Mississippi River Basin or the Great Lakes Basin. And as you add numbers in it, like HUC 8 and so forth, you get down to individual watersheds, like a creek watershed in the area. But again, it will help you visualize where things may be flowing in your backyard, so to speak. Another useful layer, the soil erosion risk, and again, this is probably derived from an NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service soil layer. And it's sort of a model, just a generalized model of, well, where things might erode. And as you can expect, lakes, like the lake here, is not going to erode very much. But when we get to the topography tools here in a little bit, where you have higher terrain, meaning hills and so forth, that would obviously have a potential for more soil erosion risk. And it's just, again, one way to visually document where things might erode on your property. So we'll get rid of that. Protected areas, these are usually public areas, federal, like national forests, state forests, state parks, regional parks, county lands. They may also include easements, such that there's this particular one here off to the west of the campus. It is a private easement being administered through the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Conservation Resources. It's a permanent wetland preserve that somebody still owns, but it's under an easement. So it's, in this case, it looks like it's protected for infinity. Again, it's the information that's tied into each of these polygons is absolutely amazing. This is what we'd call the metadata about it. And it may help you understand not only with your property, but maybe you're thinking about purchasing property, there may be an easement that you might want to make sure that you're aware of. Again, it's not comprehensive. It depends on the agencies maintaining these things and being able to serve them up. So with all these layers that we're going through, don't assume they're always 100% accurate, but they're better than nothing. All right, the PEBAT is a modeling approach, and I forget which department's doing this. I think it's in the DNR. And if I can click properly. The best way to probably view this is to zoom out further. And they have a variety of models, and I just pulled this particular one out for bird watching, where the hot spots might be. And obviously the Twin Cities think it's a hot spot area, but in reality, if you look up to the upper right here, the Duluth Superior Harbor, Hawk Ridge, that is probably one of your hotter birding zones, along with the rivers like the Mississippi and so forth. But again, there's a bunch of these PEBAT models out there that might be of interest. I just threw it in there just to get your eyes sort of clued into what might be there. And as you can tell, the area around St. John's and this big woods area does have a moderate significance, and probably because of the big woods. There's not much there, but for certain warblers and other bird species, they're very important. So we'll turn that off and we'll go down to aggregate sand gravel potential. It's probably sort of boring, but I threw it in there just from the standpoint of where might I need like gravel for like a temporary road I might have to put in. And in St. John's University, I will see this in a sec, they have a little gravel pit here that they use to make their athletic fields. So if I, again, would learn how to click on the map properly. Come on, there it goes. You should see some polygons popping up here shortly. Okay, come on, what's going on here? There we go. And these higher reds, if you want to call it, are areas where digging into the soil survey and the geologic surveys for the state, they've sort of predetermined what areas might be highly suitable for having sand and gravel resources. And obviously these may have been tapped into, let's say, to create Interstate 94, for example. For some reason, there's a ridge here, and it's probably a glacial ridge, a moraine of some sort with probably a lot of sand and gravel. It does not pull out the one that the university did, but I'll show you that in a second. Okay, soils flood frequency class. This is a little bit, it's not as clean as I would like, but it's very detailed for each of these classes about what has the potential for flooding. And the best way to look at this is probably this river up here. I forget what the name of it is. It's obviously, as you can tell by the linear feature, it is a floodplain area, but it's poorly drained and it probably frequently floods every spring. And it's one way to identify where these polygons are. I think these polygons were derived from the soil atlas, and this NRCS soil scientists would have probably rated each of these soils based on their characteristics. Is it hydric, meaning is it wetland-like, or is it very sandy, dry? And that's where this layer is most likely derived from. But again, it's probably something you should look at, especially if you're building a building on your property, and make sure you don't put it in a floodplain, because both the FEMA floodplain maps as well as NRCS maps are good, useful tools, but they may not be that accurate. All right, let's move on to soils, hydric soils or wetland soils. And we'll get actually into wetland maps here in a second. And again, these were derived from the soil types, and red meaning it should really be labeled blue, would be probably a better term for being wetness. But again, it's derived from probably the soil atlases of what they consider may have been wetlands, wet soils, I should say, at that time of the soil survey. And also keep that in mind with all these layers. It all depends on when they were, when the imagery, when the maps were derived from the imagery or surveyed on the ground. They were probably very accurate for its time, but time does change things. And with soils are pretty much the same, but with wetlands, they're constantly changing. So let's move on to topography. And actually, this is one of my favorite layers because you're sort of seeing through the trees. Let's see if it comes in. Here we go. So the gray, it's called the gray hillshade. And the way to sort of interpret these things is look for, if you want to call them sharp angles. And two things popped out immediately for me is, one is this soil pit up here, or it could have actually also been a granite pit. And there's a lot more granite quarries as you get closer to St. Cloud. As well as this could be in the lake here. That's probably an artifact from the last glaciation, but also this little, if you want to call it borrow pit, that as we change the opacity, you can see where the fields for the St. John's University, here we can change the base map to the aerial photo, you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah, you'll see the football stadium on the lower left, a nice fall color, infrared color image. And again, it looked like this was used to sort of make this flat terrain for the baseball field, football field, and so forth. Again, it's the terrain, the topography is a very useful information about what's your landscape look like and where things are flowing. And this was probably helped use to flatten this whole area out, to make these features. And then for John, what caught my eye is I'll have to ask John what he thinks of these two features are just a little bit to the east of the borrow pit. They might be just some depressions that were carved out or by the glaciers, or maybe they're a human cause. But again, it might be very useful for not only your land, but also for land you might be interested in purchasing. What's happening underneath all this. And this was derived from LiDAR, which is a laser-based pointer that scans rapidly back and forth, and it measures surfaces. So, excuse me, you can also pick out like this stream corridor. This is one of these highly flooded areas. It stands out very well along with the road network. And if you look closely, you can scan out the old Great Northern right-of-way up here, which is now railroad trail. There's one other, this looks like an esker down here. Eskers are always snake-like that, again, were glacier formed. So again, it can be very useful information about not only the surface of your topography, but also from a forestry standpoint. Think about what trees grow on like the north or southeast side of these ridges, for example, or the east side of the ridges versus the northwest side. Because from a solar radiation standpoint and a climate standpoint, trees specific species of trees do favor particular aspects of the landscape. Again, a very important layer, and I highly recommend you add this to your list. Now comes all the imagery, and as you may remember in those previous MFA articles, I dived in very deeply, and we won't go that deep in this particular case, about imagery. We went even back to the 1930s, which are not unfortunately being served up on this website, not yet, not yet anyways. So the earliest is 1991 aerial photography. That doesn't mean there isn't older aerial photography, it's just not accessible in this particular case with the Natural Resources Atlas. So 1991 was black and white film imagery when it was taken. If we go back to the campus here, things have changed. Obviously, the freeway was, actually, I think it was about completed about that time. I think it's completed in the 1980s. And it was leaf off, which is different. That's what's important here, is you can see through the trees, and with this leaf off, you can actually tell where the conifer plantations are through here that St. John's University has established over the past century, because the leaves are off. Unfortunately, most of in this atlas, there are other layers in like the MinGeo website that I mentioned in the MFA articles, along with the Minnesota MAPO, the University of Minnesota Historical Map Aerial Photo Archive. It's called MAPO. I think it's MAPHO or something like that. So there's been, since actually 2003, starting in 2003, there's been about every 2 to 3 years, statewide summer aerial imagery. And I'm just going to start with, we'll go to 2008. We'll just sort of look at this northern end of the campus here. Summer imagery isn't the greatest from a forestry standpoint. You can infer, some of the dark greens, those are the conifers. But the wealth of having this imagery taken every few years is very valuable because it shows change. And one of the changes you're going to see actually is down here with the athletic field. The football field was actually moved. And we'll see what year that was. It was in 2009. It was, let's see here, 2010. If I can turn 2009 off, there we go. Nope, still there. So 2013, what do we have? Nope, it's still not there. So 2013, nope. So it's been a relatively recent move. 2015, here's 2015, boy. I've never been to a football game, so I couldn't tell you. So 2017, if I turn off 2015, it should pop up here. There we go, right in there. That's the new field that was established. And if we turn that off, we can actually see both fields with the fall image. This is an Esri background, so it's probably been taken the last few years. I don't know the specific date. It says 2020 under the copyright, but I don't trust that in terms of its age because it's color and so forth. Anyway, so there's a nice little history you can use for like about the last decade of summer imagery for at least this area, but there are other sources of imagery for the rest of the state. You just have to wade through it and see if there's coverage and pop it up, and it'll be very useful. So with that, we're going to continue on, and we're going to hop into the drinking water supply management areas. Just something to be aware of. Didn't I click on that? So what's going on here? I might have to zoom out a little bit to see it. Oh, there it is. I thought there were some areas here. And I don't know who's, it might be the DNR or county programs, but these are just areas that have been identified as drinking water sources for communities, St. John's University, St. Joseph's to the southeast. Just something to be aware of. I don't know if there's specific regulations with them, but again, it's just a layer that's there, and it might be of some interest. Water buffers, I did not. Oh, that is interesting. I pulled this up at the last minute, and evidently there are not many water buffers around the St. John's University. This is mostly for the agricultural lands to the southeast, or west, I'm sorry, to the west of Minnesota. If I go to maybe no maps. Yeah, some of the major streams here have buffer corridors, stream going through St. John's. It's just a setback regulation. It looks like there's a little bit of an error there. All right, back to the map layers. Let's get rid of those for right now. It'll also help speed up the load. And we'll almost wrap up here. We only have a few more left. There you go. Water table. This is sort of course. It is I don't know what the source of this is, but again, it does help one understand, well, how deep water might be, in your area. And where these glacial moraines, this is the St. John's campus, it's relatively deep to the water table up on these hills, but maybe less than 10 feet or so, 20 feet or so in these light green to greenish areas. All right, wetlands. One of my former projects, this is the one project that Steve Klaber led for the Minnesota DNR, updating the Minnesota National Wetland Inventory. I was the coordinator for Fish and Wildlife for this for about 20 years, along with doing remote sensing work for them. This is relatively up to date. Again, it's not regulatory, but it should help you understand where these wetlands may occur. And they're not always 100%, but it's still useful in terms of you helping planning your landscape, such as these wetland complexes to the north of the campus here. It should also include forested wetlands. You can click on a polygon and well, let's see here. Let's get rid of the water table depth. Get rid of that, and that should solve that problem. If I click on that polygon again. All right, it's a particular L2AB. L2 means a lacustrine type of a small lake, littoral zone, aquatic bed, meaning a lot of vegetation in the water. And then there's other codes which we'll not get into. That can be in another entire presentation. You can pick on any of these. This is a freshwater, forested, or emergent wetland that's sort of semi-seasonal. Again, useful information. There's a lot of wetlands in Minnesota. And there's also, in case you're not aware of it, there's a restorable wetland index. And what this is a model. It's an estimation of what might be restorable. So this is very important from a standpoint of like road building, or if you need to build a building on your property and you need to replace your wetland you might have to fill in. These are areas that might have potential restoration potential. Generally, they're dried up lake beds. A lot of them, like these large areas here, are ones that have been drained due to, in this case, it might have been the railroad coming through, putting that corridor in that sort of drained it. There's all these little fringe, little boundary things that that's accurate, but this one might be actually somewhat accurate. So again, if you're interested in restoring wetlands, it might be another resource for you to help, for the resource, the map to help you understand what might be potentially restorable. So with that, I'm going to go back to my presentation and we'll get into some resources. So I think we're going to go back. Yes, I wanted to go back to this slide. This is the MFA website, and there is a thing called resources here. And the landowner web resources, it's just a laundry list of things that might be useful to you. All these features have information. The affiliates of MFA, like the Minnesota Forest Industries, the Minnesota Woodlands Women's Woodland Network, the Minnesota Forest Resource Council, all their websites are located under the affiliates, and you can click on those to dive into what they have for information. Obviously, the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota DNR and the local soil and water conservation districts are probably your three major sources for any kind of information about your lands and woodlands, as well as our boots on your ground and call before you cut program. So with that, and here's one example. This is the guide that came out of the University of Minnesota, the Woodland Stewardship Guide. I highly recommend downloading this. It covers everything. There are a few more resources similar to this that we've added to the website, but this is just a fantastic tool that you should add to your library. So with that, you can submit your questions ahead of time for the live question and answer, which will happen on Saturday, October 3rd, for this online Q&A question. I'll do the best that I can when these questions come in to help best answer them, as well as questions that can be answered live during that time period, which I think it's slated for, yes, 10:45 a.m. That's when I'm on the docket to sort of answer all your questions. So there's a current mugshot of me with a different hat on out in a beautiful tamarack swamp. We were doing a forested wetland survey there near Cedar Creek many years ago. Anyways, so with that, that's it. So I'm going to give it back to John, and he's going to probably shut this off, and we'll be talking to you on October 3rd, Saturday, and hopefully this COVID-19 thing will be a little bit, we'll see the light at the end of the tunnel by then. All right, have a good one.